Good morning. Our lecture today is about modern trade theories. In this lecture, we are going to talk about three different theories. Number one, Stopler-Samuelson theorem. Number two, specific factors model. And number three, product life cycle. Let's start with the first one, which is Stopler-Samuelson theorem. This theorem is derived from Hechter-Allen model. According to this theorem, an increase in the price of a good raises the income earned by factors of production. Not all the factors of production actually, but factors that are used intensively. So returning back to the assumptions of Hechter-Allen model, as we said, equilibrium according to Hechter-Allen will be achieved at the point of tangency of price line, CIC, and PPF. This is the case of closed economy. After international trade, each country will specialize in the commodity in which it has an advantage. The advantage, according to Hechter-Allen, is based on factor intensity and factor endowment. And this is the production possibilities frontier in case of Hechter-Allen model. It will be the same with respect to Stopler. This is the PPF. We are going to use PPF to distribute resources between two different commodities, say for example steel and bread, where steel is capital intensive industry and the bread is labor intensive industry. So as we move along the x-axis, so this is more capital required. As we move along the y-axis, it is more less labor required. So production of steel requires labor and capital, and the same with respect to bread, it requires labor and capital. But if you are going to compare the capital labor ratio for bread, for example, it will be L over K for bread compared to, K over L. K over L for steel. So we can find that the ratio is greater with respect to steel than bread. which means that capital, that bread is labor intensive industry. Now let's assume that the world consists of two countries, United States and Canada, and each one of them has capital and labor. So if you are going to calculate capital labor ratio for Canada and capital labor ratio for United States, assume that the ratio is greater for United States. So according to Hechter and Olin, United States has an advantage, has a comparative advantage in the production of steel. So United States will specialize in the production of steel and export it to Canada. And they are going to get bread in return. So what Stobler-Samuelson would like to say in this case? Stobler and Samuelson is like the starting point for understanding the distribution of income effect of trade. Trade will affect the distribution of income between countries and between citizens as well. So how trade affects distribution of income? There is an extension made to this theory which is known as magnification effect. Magnification effect shows that the change in output prices has a magnified effect on factors of production. Say, for example, bread price declined by 75%. As we said, that bread is labor intensive. So the most important factor of production is labor in this case. So this means that labor income will decrease by more than 75%. And similarly, if there is an increase in price by 50%, for example, labor income will increase by more than 50%. Actually, the idea of Stobler-Samuelson is dead because of trade liberalization. Trade liberalization caused wage inequality, and this is the opposite to the theory of Stobler based on Stobler-Samuelson. Trade will cause a reduction in wage inequality between countries. So it is dead because of trade liberalization. So this is the main idea of theory number one. So once again, according to theory number one, which is Stopler-Samuelson, which is derived from Hechter-Ohle model, Stopler and Samuelson focus mainly on how trade affects distribution of ink. According to their theory, if there is an increase in the price of a particular product, this will affect the return earned by the highly intensive factor used in the production of this commodity by a magnified value, which is known, and this is known as magnification effect. Theory number two. The specific factors model. In the short run, the ability of factors of production to move between different sectors is limited, while in the long run, plants and equipments can be redirected to a different lines of production. So here we have to differentiate between production in the short run and in the long run. As we said, in the short run, factors of production has limited ability to move. While in the long run, factors of production can move from one industry to another free without any restrictions. Also, specific factor model is a special case of Hechter-Ohle model. According to this theory, each commodity will be produced mainly by a factor which is used only in its production. So this means that the production of the commodity depends on factor used especially in the production of this commodity and variable factors that can be used in the production of any other commodity. Let's assume, in order to be able to understand the main idea, let's assume that there are three factors of production. According to Hector and Olin, there was two factors of production. Now there are three. Labor, capital, and land. If you are going to produce two commodities, steel and bread, production of steel requires capital and labor, and the production of bread requires land and labor. So in this case, capital is used especially in the production of steel, and land is used especially in the production of bread. Actually, this will affect income distribution within each trading nation for two main reasons. Number one, resources can't move immediately or with zero cost. And number two, industries differ in the demand for factors of production. Industries differ in their demand for factors of production. There are three main assumptions for this model. Actually, we have mentioned them. Number one, that there are three factors of production: labor, capital, and land. Labor L, capital K, and land T. So this is assumption number one. Agriculture products are going to be produced using land and labor. Assumption number three. Manufacturing products such as steel are going to use capital and labor. This is assumption number two. Number four, labor is a mobile factor that can be used in either sectors. Number five, land and capital are both specific factors. And finally, assumption number six, perfect competition prevails in both markets. So how much of each commodity the economy is going to produce? Here is the production function for each one of them. This is for manufactured products. QM is a function of capital and labor used in the production of manufactured goods. And this is the production function for food or agriculture. Bread, for example, it's a function of labor used in the production of food, and T, which is land. Production function for manufactured goods will be just like this. This is the total product or quantity, and this is number of labor. The shape of the production function reflects the law of diminishing marginal returns. As you increase more workers beyond a specific level, the productivity of worker is going to decrease. This can be represented graphically by marginal productivity of labor. This is a marginal productivity of labor in case of manufactured goods. So now we can use these equations to derive the production possibilities from here. But now we would like to use the specific factor model in international trade. So we would like to know how international trade is represented in the specific factor model. In international trade, a country must face a world relative price, which is different from its domestic or autarky relative price. Now we are going to draw demand and supply curve, but it's not the usual one. It's related to the wallet as a whole. As a result, on the x-axis, we are going to put the relative quantity of the product. Say, for example, of cloth. So this will be Q of cloth divided by Q of food, for example. The same with respect to price. It's not a price, it's the relative price. Now let's assume that this is the world relative demand for the world. And this is relative supply. and this is world relative supply. The relative supply curve is related to the country itself, while world relative supply is related to the world. The difference between the two supply curves may be due to a change in resources, differences in resources between countries, or change in technology, while demand across the world will not change. Total demand is constant, but supply is going to differ. So differences between RS and RS world due to amount of resources, improvement in technology. Okay. So opening up to trade induced an increase in the relative price from 1 to 2. So international trade will affect the relative price of commodities and increase it from 1 to 2. This is how international trade affects specific factor model. Or in other words, this is how international trade is illustrated using a specific factor model. Now we are going to move to the third theory, which is product cycle. This model was developed by Raymond Vernon in 1966. One of the greatest points of strength of this model is that it can explain exports of sophisticated manufactured goods from countries that have shortage of skilled labor and capital. So what is the product cycle in high and low income countries? can be illustrated using this figure. This is time and the quantity. The production passes through 3 different stages. This is production. This is phase number 1, phase number 2, and phase number 3, while this is consumption. So the production had 3 main phases: early phase, middle phase, and late phase. In the early phase, stages of production, in the first phase or the early phase, manufacturer need to be near a high income market. So in this phase, producers must be near to high income market where consumers feedback is greatest, so they can supply the product and get a feedback quickly about this market, make any adjustment or improvement required. So this means that there must be a consumer base with substantial income and skilled marketing to advertise for this product. While with respect to the input side, so this is with respect to the output when the product has been produced and they would like to sell it. With respect to the input side, during this initial period, it's expected that there is no profit or little profit. Also, an experimentation and improvement in design must be made. Over time, the product begins to leave the early stage or the early phase and enter to the next one, which is the middle phase. During the middle phase, the product begins to be standardized in size, standardized in features, and manufacturing process. During this phase, they can make experimentation in order to provide new designs, begin a new line of production, etc. In the middle phase, production begins to lift the countries with low labor cost. So during this stage, production shifts to countries with low labor cost. As the product is standardized, so it doesn't matter whether the one who is going to produce it is skilled or semi-skilled or unskilled. So in this case, production will shift to semi-skilled or unskilled workers. Later on, the production reaches the third phase, which is the late phase of production. During the late phase, in high-income countries, consumption will exceed production. As you can see from the figure, that in the late phase, consumption exceeds production. As a result, an increasing share of world production has been moved to developing countries. Where labor is unskilled workers. So the pressure on high-income countries in the late phase is to turn toward the innovation of new product, which starts the cycle once again. So after reaching the late phase, with respect to high-income countries, they have to start to think about new innovation. And as a result, the product cycle is going to start from the early stage once again. And production is going to move, a huge portion of the production is going to move to the developing countries where labor are unskilled labor. What about the case of low-income countries? This is consumption. And this is production. As we said, that the production process is going to move to the low-income countries in the middle stage. During the middle stage, production of low-income countries is much more lower than consumption. While during the late stage, production is going to increase as the high-income countries are going to focus on new innovations, and the production process, or a huge portion of the production process, has been moved to the low-income countries. So during third stage, production is going to exceed consumption. This is the main idea of product cycle theory. This is the end of our lecture today. Thank you and see you next week.